Good morning and welcome everyone to the 2023 Research Colloquium and International Moon Day. If you would please finish your conversations and make your way up to take a seat, we will begin our program. Welcome to our Colloquium and International Moon Day celebration. I am Marina Kingsbury. Dr. Lisa Williams was unable to make it today. We do know that Mother Nature threw a wrench in people's plans, but show must go on, and we will continue going on today. I will step in as an MC for today's program, and I would like to begin by welcoming to the stage Dr. Chuck Carr to to deliver the welcome remarks.
All right, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome each and every one of you here to the 2023 International Moon Day. I am Chuck Carr. I have the honor of serving as the president here at the University of Alabama in Huntsville. We're really thrilled to be able to partner both with Drake State and the U.S. Space and Rocket Center this year to bring the MUREP Research Colloquium here to our campus. UAH's history actually began with an interaction with the intergalactically renowned Dr. Wernher von Braun and his desire to have a research institute here in Huntsville to support efforts at NASA as we strove to go to the moon. So it's a long storied part of our history here. We're really pleased to bring together a group like this so that we can have our students continue to work and learn with outstanding industry and government experts. I think Dr. von Braun would be really proud to know that over the course of our 50-plus year history here at UAH, we've stayed true to working on technical issues with engineering and science and certainly space exploration. UAH is also home to the Alabama Space Grant Consortium, led by Dr. Dale Thomas. This organization plays a key role in helping Alabama students to pursue a career in the space science, aerospace, and related engineering fields. You'll have an opportunity to hear from Dr. Thomas today. Really pleased with the leadership that he provides to the Space Grant Consortium. I also want to take a moment here to commend Dr. Pat Sims, the president at Drake State, for having the ingenuity to bring such a worthy event to Huntsville. I'd also like to take a moment to thank Dr. Pat Sims for allowing us to play some small role as serving as the physical location in which this entity is going to get together. Again, we really are pleased to have you here on our campus. We're excited about the event today. We're very grateful to have an opportunity to play some small part in it. I hope you enjoy the day, find it to be very productive. Go Chargers.
Thank you, Dr. Carr. And because we are celebrating International Moon Day, next I would like for you to direct your attention to the screen for the address from Dr. Nasser Al-Sahaf from Moon Village Association.
Greetings, everyone. I'm Nasr Sahaf, Chair of the International Moon Day Group. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the second celebration of the International Moon Day. In 2021, the Moon Village Association recommended to United Nations Office on Outer Space Affairs the establishment of a day to commemorate humanity's first landing on the moon in 1969 with the Apollo 11 mission. The International Moon Day was declared by the United Nations General Assembly on 9 December 2021 to be commemorated by all member nations on July 20th of every year starting in 2022. Last year, we celebrated the inaugural session of the IMD at Drake State Community and Technical College in Huntsville, Alabama, where it all began more than half a century ago, and the home of the Saturn V rocket, which made it all happen. Every year, we have a new theme. Last year's theme was Lunar Exploration, Coordination, and Sustainability. And this year's theme is Beginning the New Lunar Journey for Mankind. The IMD is a special opportunity to raise awareness and educate the public about the status and prospects for humanity and sustainable exploration and utilization of the moon. IMD events aim to foster increased global awareness, cooperation, and coordination among stakeholders worldwide, and to promote increased participation towards this goal for future generations. This year, we have increased the number of participating countries from 23 in 2022 to 35 countries this year in 46 global events so far, such as yours here today. Our main event, IMD 2023, is held this year at the Science Museum in Gwacheon, South Korea. In addition to keynote speakers from the space industry, private and public sectors, we will be featuring an expert panel discussion on a variety of topics and current controversial space issues, which should make for a very interesting discussion. And you're all welcome to download it from our official website on July 20th. In conclusion, I wish you all a very successful IMD global event wherever you may be on the second celebration of IMD 2023. Thank you, and God bless.
Thank you, Dr. Al-Sahaf. We regret that you are unable to be with us today, but I do want to underscore that our event is listed on the IMD website, and we're proud to be continuing carrying the torch on this event. And now I would like to welcome Dr. Pat Sims for her welcoming remarks.
Good morning, and I'm excited to welcome you to the 2023 Mirror Research Colloquium and International Moon Day celebration. I want to start by thanking my friend and colleague, Dr. Chuck Carr. Thank you for being such a gracious host. You and your team have been amazing to work with, so we're really excited to be here. And I also want to acknowledge the Space and Rocket Center team. Robert, Dr. Taylor, all have been great to collaborate to pull this event together. I hope you had an opportunity to engage with our students because the colloquium is an important part of this event, and they are doing some very interesting and important work, and that is our future. So I hope you had a chance to engage with them. And I do want to say that we could not be here in this space without leadership and guidance. We have Frontiers board members. We have a Frontiers advisory board at the college, and I see board members. Board members, if you raise your hand for the Frontiers advisory board, Dr. Mankins, Jeff Hodge, Dr. Joe Fitzgerald, Dr. Strong, thank you all. That's significant for us because we are a community college, a two-year institution, and usually community colleges students, we are not in the research space. And so the research colloquium that we've been able to pull together under the guidance of the Frontiers Advisory Board is really significant because This is the work that prepares students that when they're ready to transfer to UAH, Dr. Carr, they're ready. They have a foundation for research, and so this work is very significant. So it's just exciting to be here to embrace this spirit and of discovery and wonder around the moon. And we want to do two things today. We certainly want to honor the visionaries and the pioneers in this space, acknowledge the work that's responsible for establishing the body of knowledge that we around the cosmos that we use today, but we also want to look around the corner and unlock new frontiers of knowledge and continue to inspire dreams beyond the borders of our planet. We are fortunate that we're in the city of Huntsville. We're in a city that's deep in research and scientific discovery, and so it's a great time for us. So I hope that today's program, through the panel discussion, the student presentations, and our keynote speaker, it's my hope that this event continues to encourage us to push the boundaries of our thinking around research and that it paves the way for future space exploration. So again, welcome to our event today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the program.
Thank you, Dr. Sims. Next, I would like to welcome Dr. Kay Taylor from the U.S. Space and Rocket Center.
Well, thank you, Dr. Kingsbury. Thank you all for the opportunity for the U.S. Space and Rocket Center to participate in this great day. I would also like to thank Dr. Charles Carr for hosting us here today and providing the opportunity to come together, to think, to share, and anticipate the next steps in living off Earth. I'd also like to thank Dr. Patricia Sims of Drake State Community College for her institution's early adoption of the inaugural International Moon Day in 2022. Drake State planted the flag to help this event gather momentum in Huntsville, and her leadership is greatly appreciated. It is fitting that we celebrate this day in Huntsville, Alabama. Huntsville was the cradle of development for the Saturn V launch vehicle that took humans to the moon in 1969 with the Apollo program, and Huntsville is the home to the Space Launch System that will return humans to the moon with the Artemis program. Since the days of the Apollo program, the U.S. Space and Rocket Center has been a showcase of that technology that makes human spaceflight a reality, and an incubator for inspiring the next generation of explorers that through the power and passion of exploration will take us back. Since 1970, less than 1 year after that one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind, the Rocket Center has been inspiring millions who've come through our doors. And through our space camp programs, we've established experiences that challenge young people to think, to train, and problem solve like an astronaut. Today, Space Camp is the largest residential STEAM camp in the world. We have over 1 million alumni, including 16 astronauts. And one of those astronauts is Christina Koch, who is slated for Artemis II. That's part of the power of Huntsville, Alabama. The U.S. Space and Rocket Center was invited to participate at the Paris Air Show, one of the largest aerospace and avionics platforms on the planet. And our CEO, Dr. Kimberly Robinson, herself a retired Marshall engineer, was asked to moderate a panel with the State of Alabama Department of Commerce that focused on Alabama's rich intellectual talent resources that develop and thrive in Alabama's higher education ecosystem. We're here today in the midst of that ecosystem to learn from the next generation of scientists and researchers who are sharing with us advances in photovoltaics, flexible circuits, additive manufacturing, and yes, the human factors. It's this research and these ideas and these wonderful young people that will help us get back to the moon. And once we're there, it will help us shape how we continue to thrive here. I am looking forward to this day, and I thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. distinguished guests, if you'd like to take a seat with the audience. I would like to take a moment to introduce myself and tell you a little bit more about the Frontiers Engineering Coalition and Frontiers Research Program at Drake State. I'm Marina Kingsbury. I'm the principal investigator on NASA Europe Includes Frontiers Engineering Coalition Program and a program manager of the Frontiers Research Program. The theme for the International Moon Day 2023 International Moon Day is beginning the new lunar journey for humanity. And the Frontiers Research Program focuses on just that, on the future of lunar exploration. The program was funded by NASA's cooperative agreement in 2020 to focus on supporting the additive manufacturing of habitats by creating an additive construction curriculum, training students, and setting up additive construction laboratory at Drake State. The program grew throughout the next several years with the support from Alabama State Legislature, NASA Marshall, Jacobs, Torch Technologies, NASA Europe program, and Europe and NSF Includes funds. Today, Frontiers Research Program espouses several large projects, including the 3D printing of concrete structures, the fiber puller for autonomous emplacement of reinforcement for lunar habitats, the outfitting of space habitats project, an engineering training and education project called the Frontiers Engineering Coalition, supported by NASA Europe Includes grant, that works to bring in the future of engineering talent from underrepresented backgrounds. The Frontiers Engineering Coalition Fund supported summer research internships for 6 Drake State students and 4 Middle Tennessee State University students this summer. Today's research colloquium culminates the summer research experience for program participants with student research presentations. I would like to thank faculty members and students from UAH and Alabama A&M University for also presenting their work alongside our interns, making this event engaging. I hope you all had the opportunity to visit and interact with research teams from Drake State, MTSU, UAH, and Alabama A&M. I would like to take a moment to thank all the faculty mentors who supported our students, including Dr. Kelly Strong from MTSU and the MTSU faculty team, Dr. Judy Schneider, Dr. Dale Thomas, and Dr. Samson Golson from UAH, Dean Deng from Alabama A&M. Drake State would like to thank Michael Fisk, who has been continuously guiding and supporting Drake State research efforts. I would like to thank Drake State's engineering design instructor Tammy Clark and lab manager Jeanette Zatowski and President Sims for unwavering support of our research efforts. I hope you enjoy the rest of the program that includes the expert panel discussion and a keynote lecture. Thank you. At this time, I would like the panel speakers to make your way up to the podium and a panel moderator. We will begin shortly.
Well, welcome and good morning, everyone. And I promise you, when I was looking at this array of experts, of panelists, that today's panel will be extraordinarily interesting and meaningful for you going forward. It will be one that we're glad you were here. Let's put it that way. You're glad you were here, and you will get a great deal out of. We have some extraordinary individuals on our panel today, and I want to thank them in advance for their time this morning. We're going to do this a bit differently, perhaps, but then again, perhaps not. But we're going to conduct this panel in a kind of an orderly way. There will be an opportunity, perhaps, for you to ask questions, but it'll depend on time. We've got an hour, and an hour is going to pass like a flash of light when we discuss what we're going to be talking about here. But you're going to be captivated by it, I promise. If you're not, we'll give you your money back. We're going to conduct the panel. I'm going to introduce each panelist, give a nice introduction that their mother would be proud of. And after I give each individual's introduction, I'd ask them to make a brief introductory comment, very brief, because we've got a lot to cover here. And then I'll introduce the next panelist and so on until all the panelists have been introduced. And then we will go about a series of questions to the panel, some of which are addressed individually to the panelists, and others are going to be addressed by the entire panel. So we'll do that in that way. So to keep you all confused, I'm going to introduce the panel in a random manner, you might say. Let's hang on one second. Yeah, it's somewhat random in terms of the way that the panel is facing you here, but you'll know who they are because they will be the one making the comment. First, I'd like to introduce Dr. Jennifer Edmondson, who earned her doctorate in Earth and Planetary Sciences at the University of New Mexico while studying the geology of the Moon and Mars. She came to Marshall Space Flight Center as a postdoc in 2008 and joined the Planetary Regolith Simulant team as a contractor in 2009. She participated in the Manufacturing Innovation Project starting in 2010, which ultimately became In-Space Manufacturing. She is the Moon to Mars Planetary Autonomous Construction Technology. That's a mouthful, but if you want to shorten it to IMPACT. She is the IMPACT Project Manager. Please welcome Jennifer Edmondson. And Jennifer, if you give us an opening comment, please. Jennifer.
Hi, everyone. It's wonderful to be here today, and thank you all for coming.
That's like I like it. That was very brief. Thank you, Jennifer. Our next panelist will be Dr. Dale Thomas, who currently serves as professor and eminent scholar of systems engineering at the Department of Industrial and Systems Engineering and Engineering Management at the University of Alabama in Huntsville. His active research projects include nuclear thermal propulsion, space launch system core stage engines, small satellites, and space systems model-based systems engineering. Dale also serves as director for the Alabama Space Grant Consortium and as a deputy director of the UAH Propulsion Research Center. Prior to his retirement from NASA in July of 2015, gosh, it doesn't seem that long, does it, Dale? Dale served as the Associate Center Director for NASA Marshall Space Flight Center. So, in which role he provided technical leadership for all Marshall Space Flight Center space flight projects. Please welcome Dr. Dale Thomas. Dale? That was a good entrance, Dale. It really was.
You know, I've always dreamed. I've had dreams where that happened. That's the first time it's actually happened. So.
Dale, do you want to make an opening comment of any sort or just say hello to the folks?
Well, as I was driving in, I was actually talking to my daughter on the phone. Am I live? Yeah, okay. And I asked her if she knew what happened 54 years ago today, and of course she had to think a minute because she's only 31 years old. And so then I sort of reminded her, and I remember I was a young boy, 10 years old at the time. I'll let y'all do the math. But it was a Sunday night, and I was very excited because I always had to go to bed. My mom put me to bed at 8 o'clock, and I got to stay up late because something big was going to be on TV that night. And so in our 19-inch black and white TV. That'll be hard for some of you to get your mind around because it's smaller than your computer monitor. I remember, seeing it happen and heard Neil Armstrong utter those words, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. I didn't appreciate it that much at the time. I was just wishing, why is the video so grainy? You can't really make this stuff out. And then, about 40 years later, I was blessed to actually get to have a conversation with Neil Armstrong, a very humble man who really appreciated his place in history. Okay, so International Moon Day is always a big event for me. It always takes me back throughout my career with NASA, all the way back to my childhood, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here today and share some thoughts with y'all.
Thank you, Dale. Our next panelist will be Dr. Kay Taylor, which you just heard earlier. Dr. Taylor is Vice President of Education at the United States Space and Rocket Center. She leads the education team that creates training experiences in Space Camp, public education at the Space and Rocket Center, and professional development for teachers. She's also the co-investigator for the Sally Ride Earth Camp at Space Camp. She holds degrees in communication from Auburn University, the University of Georgia, and the University of Alabama. Please welcome Dr. Kay Taylor. Dr. Taylor.
Thank you. Thank you. You've heard from me already this morning. Just know that I look forward to the conversation today.
Thank you. Next panelist, Dr. Kelly Strong. Dr. Kelly Strong received his baccalaureate degree in civil engineering from Iowa State University and an MBA from the University of St. Thomas and a PhD from the University of Colorado. He's been a teacher and researcher in construction for over 25 years and is currently professor and director of the School of Concrete and Construction Management at Middle Tennessee State University. Dr. Strong has completed a range of research projects in the areas including construction innovation for public infrastructure projects. He is active in the construction industry, including the American Society of Civil Engineers and Design Build Institute of America. Please welcome Dr. Kelly Strong. Dr. Strong.
Thank you. So I want to thank Dr. Kingsbury for putting this together and supporting our Team NASA back there at the table. We appreciate everything you've done for us. And I appreciate the opportunity to be on the panel today, and I look forward to sharing ideas about this exciting new chapter in the human experience.
Thank you, Dr. Strong. Our next panelist is Mr. Jeff Hars, but I'll award you a doctor right up here as we speak, because he's certainly got the experience and wherewithal in education to be one, that's for sure. So Mr. Hars has 37 years of aerospace and technology experience with 25 years of executive technical leadership. He is a vice president and general manager for the Jacobs Space Exploration Group, a 1,200-person workforce supporting Marshall Space Flight Center. Jeff earned his Bachelor's of Electrical Engineering degree from Auburn University, and he holds a Master's in Electrical Engineering from the University of Florida. Please welcome Mr. Jeff Hars. Jeff?
As you can tell, I don't normally get invited to sit on panels because of the lack of a doctor in front of my name. But today I'm very excited to be here and honored to sit amongst my colleagues here. Between me and Dr. Taylor, we probably don't know who to root for in the SEC because we got it just about covered. We do. But
Not Texas and Oklahoma.
not yet, right? But it's very exciting. This is, I guess, the second time I've participated in this, and looking forward to some of the dialogue today. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Jeff. The way we're going to conduct this is I'm going to ask one question of all the panelists, a question that all the panelists will address. And, of course, that'll stimulate the discussion among the panel about their responses, and so they'll react to one another. But we'll start it, and we'll go down, and this time not in random order. We'll go down from your left, or my right, your left. We'll go down in the order of the panel here in terms of them addressing a response to this question. What do you see? This is a question for the entire panel. Each panelist will address it, and then they'll address each other. What do you see as the single most important scientific advancement contributing to lunar exploration? And what will it take to make that advancement a reality? Jeff?
All right. So I'm going to play off this lack of a PhD theme for the answer to this question. I'll repeat. I'm going to play off my lack of PhD theme for the answer to this question. If you're a PhD, that means you got very smart in a very narrow subject matter. And it's probably something you continue to do because that's a lot of effort. So what I'm going to talk about is not a specific advancement, but rather sort of a more generalized question. There's been a multitude of scientific advancements that have been key to exploration, whether it's additive manufacturing on Earth or in situ in the lunar environment. It's composites, it's computational models, avionics, software development. All these things have had great advances in the near term that's helped us on our journey. Another large one is understanding human physiology in space and what it takes to support life in space. That's a big one, and it's something that there's been a lot of advances on. But the problem is with a sustained presence in space is the fact that you have to develop all these complex systems, and so there's all these individual complex systems that are being developed. And then you have to be able to integrate, operate, and maintain these systems in extreme conditions in space, and hopefully on the lunar surface, and then later on Mars. So complexity doesn't always equate to reliability. And when you integrate a lot of different complex systems, in my experience, failures happen at interfaces. And so you have this very, very complicated mosaic of advanced technology and scientific principles that we're trying to create on the lunar surface. And so what do you do for, to avoid failure is you build in redundancy. The problem with redundancy is it weighs, it has mass, generally speaking. And the transit costs for that solution to make your systems reliable is just probably too high. And so you have to build very reliable systems, and you can't just rely on redundancy on the lunar surface to make sure things work. And so that's a real problem. So how do we realize sort of this advancement across the board for all these scientific and technical advances, individual advances? First of all, it's the architecture. If you remember Apollo, one of the key things they did was define an architecture that basically said nothing comes back but the little tiny capsule on top, right? That was a key decision that enabled us to go to the moon and return safely. We have a similar architecture, although it's even more complicated, I would say, for the Artemis missions. But that's key. So evolutionary development, test, getting back on the lunar surface in an incremental way with an eye towards Mars. Everything we do on the moon, all those missions should have an eye towards Mars. And so if you look out at the NASA architecture, it talks about returning, exploring on the lunar surface, which equates to science. The next step, or evolution, is sustained presence. And this is where it gets really interesting, and we'll probably hear this as we go through this panel. So a sustained presence, in the words of NASA, means science and economic opportunities. And so when you have economic opportunities, it puts a different spin on things, particularly when you have multiple actors. And then finally, transit to Mars. And so having a robust architecture, having the national will to do this, which we had in Apollo, having sufficient funding, all that enables the scientific advancements that we're going to hear probably in more detail from the other panel members.
Thank you, Jeff.
It's like a politician. You ask one question, I'll give you the answer that I want to give.
No, that was very good, Jeff. Let me repeat the question again and address this to the same question to Dr. Taylor. What do you see as the single most important scientific advancement contributing to lunar exploration, and what will it take to make that advancement a reality?
Such a simple and straightforward question. And yet I'm just back on my heels trying to answer. But I'll try and couch it in an example. I think the single technology, which it isn't a single technology, but I think the single example that I could give for what will make a return to the moon possible is the International Space Station. Because the International Space Station gave us the delta of time. We're not going back to the moon the way we did in the Apollo program, where we went with finite resources and a finite timeline. We're going back to the moon. We're going back to stay. We're going back to explore, to be sustainable, to pursue economic engagement. And that's what the ISS has given us for 20 plus years. We've had a single person, at least, living off this world for over 2 decades, safely. We've learned how to conserve precious resources in a closed system of air and water. We're learning how to grow food in that off-Earth lab, not just for sustenance, but for that human factor of nurturing something in an environment that in every way wants to kill you, even more so than Australia wants to kill you. We have learned how to work together as nations on this platform. We have developed technologies that come back to Earth and transform how we live here. If you look at the crystal protein growth, the communications technologies, the ISS has been an ongoing experiment that is preparing us to go to the moon and then go where we choose to beyond the moon.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor.
Thank you.
Dr. Strong, address the same question, if you would, please. The single most important scientific advancement contributing to lunar exploration, and what will it take to make that advancement a reality?
Thanks. Jeff and Kay gave me a good lead-in because I'm going to drill down a little bit deeper. Kay mentioned communications, and Jeff mentioned complex systems, and I think that if you talk about a sustained presence on the moon, we are going to have to figure out how to do some fairly complex remote sensing over large distances to try to keep that infrastructure safe. Probably going to have to constantly monitor the lunar infrastructure for deformation and cracks, and then you don't go to Home Depot and grab some caulk when you're starting to fail. I mean, we have to figure out how to keep that infrastructure in place. And I guess to give you an idea of maybe in the U.S., there's over 600,000 bridges in the United States. We inspect all of them every year. And we have a system in place for taking the bad ones out of service, hopefully, for the most part, before someone crashes into the river. But those methods aren't going to work on the moon. You can't run out into the street if the lunar infrastructure starts to fail. There isn't any place to go. So we're going to have very, very highly developed, advanced sensing, so that when a crack starts to develop in the infrastructure at its microscopic level before it's visible to the naked eye, we're going to have to know about that and then have some autonomous maintenance. We've kind of focused on autonomous construction, but the next step in that, and what I think the next big scientific breakthrough is going to be in autonomous maintenance, having a robot that can go out and seal a crack or replace something that's broken that is radio controlled, either from the orbiting platform or from inside the habitat. And this structural health monitoring, the technologies that we use on bridges and structures on Earth here will not function in a harsh environment. They just won't work. So we're going to need to, and we've started that here even at Drake State on the printed structure by looking at some very new sensing technologies that use light waves, for instance, instead of the traditional electromagnetic sort of sensing. So, and then I think in addition to that, trying to figure out kind of self-healing materials. There's research on self-healing concrete, for instance, that once a crack starts to develop, there's a mechanism in place that concrete almost heals itself. That's a very advanced material research that I think is going to be a key part of this autonomous maintenance threshold that we're going to try to cross. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Strong. Dr. Thomas, would you address the same question, please, if you don't mind? The single most important scientific advancement contributing to lunar exploration, what will it take to make that advancement a reality? Dr. Thomas.
Joe, I don't mind at all. I'd be glad to. So this was actually a tough question. Joe shared it with us, I don't know, maybe a week ago or so. And it's one of the harder questions. I wrestled with it over the weekend, and then I just happened to be channel surfing, I think it was Monday night, and I ran across the movie Apollo 13. How many of y'all have seen Apollo 13? Okay, good. That's going to make this point a lot easier to make. So you remember when, after the accident, and the mission management team is gathered, and they're trying to figure out what to do, and, Gene Kranz is plotting, getting the guidance when to do the firing and everything, and this young kid, and I mean literally a young kid, he was 24 years old at the time, John Aaron, says, wait a minute, guys, power is everything. You don't have enough power to get even to this point to do that. You're going to drain the batteries, the crew will die. You don't have to worry about these burns and reentry maneuvers and everything. They'll already be dead. So I was really wrestling with the question, what is the most important? Because as, Jeff and Kay and Kelly just mentioned, there's so many important things that we have to do, so many technology advancements that are needed. But I wasn't going to run away, and so I do pick electrical power, okay, as the most important one, because with power, you can have, the energy to build your structures, to generate sustainable air, to have the lights on so you can grow your food. It just enables everything else. And so what you need is ample power. During my career with NASA, power was always a big challenge because you never had enough. One of the first jobs I had with NASA was looking at potential complements of payloads for a Space Lab mission. Space Lab was this pressurized volume that flew in the bay of the space shuttle, and you'd put science experiments in it. And so sometimes, we'd look them up, tally them, look at the duty cycles, and say, is there enough power to run this mission or not? And sometimes it was an infeasible mission. Power is always constraining. So, size the power, and there is currently research going on by the Department of Energy on small modular nuclear reactors here on Earth. I see some of you nodding your head. You've heard of that program, that have the potential to really help. Department of Defense is very interested in those for, reliable power in remote locations that are off the grid. And NASA has actually looked at such a program called CRUSTY, and don't ask me what CRUSTY stands for. I'm sure Alex could recite the acronym if you need to know, but KRUSTY. NASA is great at acronyms. So everybody's looking at it. Okay, what will it take to make it a reality? Just simply not to lose interest. There's no big individual advances in technology needed to make these small modular nuclear reactors real. They are doable, but are we going to lose interest? And by the way, partnerships among government agencies are exceptionally difficult. NASA had rather partner with a foreign entity like the European Space Agency than partner with, the Department of Defense or somebody else. It's just really, really hard. So continuing to put emphasis on that, from our political leadership, which I don't have to tell you how hard that is in today's environment to have any focus at all. And to see it through, and in a few years, we'll have those basic technologies demonstrated, and then we can start worrying about that other long laundry list of technologies to make this a reality.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas. Dr. Edmondson, would you address the same question, please? Single most important scientific advancement contributing to lunar exploration. What will it take to make that advancement a reality?
So I actually grew up watching Star Trek, and I thought one of the coolest things about it is that you had a replicator. So if Captain Picard wanted a cup of tea, he could just tell the computer to produce a cup of tea, and he had it.
Kirk, not Captain Picard.
Wasn't it Picard that did?
No, they both did.
Okay, they both did.
I'm just telling you generationally.
I'm dating myself here, okay. So if you could produce something on demand, it could be some kind of critical, hardware need. If your environmental control life support system is going to go out in 30 seconds because you need this sensor and you need to switch it out or something, I think that's one of the critical things that we're going to need for sustainable lunar presence. So I would say that the advancement would be things like rapid prototyping, which became additive manufacturing. When you scale that up, that's additive construction, being able to produce what you need on demand. And we have the technology now. We've done an example of 3D printing on the space station. There's a company that actually does commercial 3D printing on the space station. We're currently working on how to print metals and electronics on the space station as well, using the space station as a test bed for lunar applications. And so that's great. We're also working on in situ resource utilization technology to take lunar regolith and extract metals and oxygen from it. And that's awesome too. The thing that we're missing in between the extraction of metals from regolith and the additive manufacturing technology is being able to make the feedstock that we need for additive manufacturing and construction hardware. And I'm talking about making the metal alloys for wires or the powders for powder bed fusion. If we want to make polymers, things like that, we need to demonstrate these things on the lunar surface or in, on the space station using that platform, and prove that we can do this. So there are quite a few technology gaps, especially between the actual extraction and using feedstock. And we need a lot of different materials because there are so many different applications. There's habitats, there's landing pads, there's roads, there's outfitting technologies where you need to make, pipes or sinks or furniture, basically. I mean, you don't want to fly all this stuff from Earth because it's so expensive to fly things from Earth. We're talking about $1 million to $1.2 million per kilogram, 2.2 pounds, to get to the moon based on current commercial lunar payload services data. So this is really expensive stuff. We have to use in situ resources or it's just not going to be economically viable. We don't want to take everything up there with us. We need to make off-planet survival, sustainable so that we're Earth independent because it takes a while to get to the moon. It would take even longer to get to Mars. We need to make sure that everybody has what they need for surviving on the planet. So I think additive manufacturing, rapid prototyping, additive construction type stuff will definitely be helpful.
Thank you, Dr. Edmondson. That was quite interesting, quite stimulating. Now we're going to move on to questions to individual panelists. And after the panelist addresses that question, the panelist to whom the question is addressed to, after that response, I want to ask if there are any other comments from the remaining panelists on that question. First question will go to Mr. Jeff Hars. Jeff, aside from the significant scientific and engineering hurdles, what do you see as the greatest challenge to a sustained presence on the moon or Mars? Mr. Hars.
Okay. So the title of this panel, or the topic of this panel, is From Science Fiction to Reality, and then it goes on. When I hit science fiction, I stop because I like science fiction. And so I'm going to sort of talk about this, the challenges other than the technology challenges, sort of, and relate back to science fiction. So I'm going to sort of do a little bit of a poll as I go. So the big three, do you know the big three science fiction authors? Heinlein, Asimov? Nope. Clark. Who has read any science fiction from those, or these days listened? Come on, students, you gotta read this stuff. This is good stuff. So Heinlein had some Starship Troopers, the movie. That was one of his books. The Moon is a Harsh Mistress is another one. Asimov did the Foundation series, which I just saw is going to be like on Apple TV, I think, which is going to be interesting. Clark wrote a book that a lot of military people read called Superiority. some of my favorites was Gibson, Neuromancer. He's got a series out right now called The Peripheral, which is very interesting. It's on one of the streaming networks. Dune, Frank Herbert, that was probably the first book that I read that was really captured my imagination from a science fiction point of view. But there's one thing that if you look at all these authors, they wrote about, right? They wrote about science fiction, but the backdrop was always human conflict or interplanetary conflict, right? If you look at the Star Trek, there was always conflict in Star Trek. And I don't think that our nature is going to change just because we land on the moon and create a presence there. So we have to be able to deal with the eventual conflicts that are going to occur. So we're doing work right now to come up with sort of models of governance on the moon. But if you, and that's great, and we got to do that. Well, we're doing that on Earth, and it isn't working out all that great all around the Earth, right? And so it's a little bit naive in my mind to think that we're going to have these papers that we all sign and it's going to work better on the moon or on Mars. Once you get to moon, you're disconnected from Earth, and so you're sort of you are you, and you got to deal with all the things to survive there. It's 3 or 4 days transit time. When you get to Mars, you're there, and it's 9 months to a year transit time, and probably insurmountable amount of money to send help, if you will. And so, I've been reading the book that Harari wrote called *Sapiens*, and it talks about sort of the history of man and how our civilization sort of evolved over time, and it talks about certain things that happened that resulted in how we are today. And I think that applies to probably us in space as well, because when we get to the moon, the first thing we're going to need to do is create physiological safety for ourselves, right? We're going to have shelter, power. We're going to have food. We're going to have energy. And so that's the foundational thing. So if you think about sort of the hierarchy of needs, that's the base. And so everyone's going to focus on that. After you get that taken care of, which I think we will, particularly on the moon. Mars is a bigger challenge, but we'll do that on the moon. After you do that, then people worry about safety and security. And so at that point, then you have other systems you put in place besides technical and scientific systems about rules and enforcement of rules and what happens when somebody breaks a rule. And so now if you get multiple parties on the moon, then that becomes that much more complicated. And so after that, people, after you got physiological safety, and then, or sustenance, and then you have safety, then people try to have create a sense of belonging. And so you do that by a family or a tribe, or you create some organization that you say, this is us, and if you're not us, then you're them. And that's just, I think, human nature. Now, we'll probably have a time where that isn't a driving force, because just surviving in that environment is going to be the focus of every ounce of energy and intellectual horsepower that we have. But eventually, we're going to get to the point where working on diplomacy and different kind of agreements is going to be exceedingly important. I just heard a presentation earlier this year out in Colorado at the Space Symposium. They talked exactly about this and how they're trying to put things in place so that once we get there, we'll be able to have a collaborative, cooperative existence with other tribes, nations, if you will, when they get there. And so the more people that show up, the more difficulty it is to create equilibrium. And that's what we're striving for on the moon, right? Creating equilibrium so everything is in balance. This past Tuesday at the Space Club breakfast, the speaker was exactly this topic. And they're talking about all the things they're doing, including the Artemis Accords, where they have, I think, 29 nations now. They signed up. In the same article I was reading about that, it said Venezuela just signed the Chinese equivalent of, space accords. And so we're not even there yet. We're already taking sides.
Here, we're not there.
Yeah, we're not here or there, right. So I think that we can solve the physics because we have a history of solving the physics problems. Solving the human condition is going to be a continuing and ongoing challenge. And so, global cooperation was mentioned this morning. in the opening comments. And having true cooperation is going to be something that, aside from the science and technology, problems to solve, which I think we will, is a problem that we can't let get out of our sight. Otherwise, all the work we did solving the physics problems sort of goes by the wayside because we can't get along. So that's going to be key to not only Moon, but certainly Mars.
Wonderful comments, and quite frankly, it's unanticipated. What you, I think that's what shocks the group here to some degree, as to the nature of your response to that very insightful question.
I just turned 60, so I'm getting more cynical. I think maybe that's my problem.
I think bold is the question. Bold,
More
instead of they're
bold.
bold. I'm going to ask the rest of the panelists here if they'd like to make comments on what they just heard on this question and on Mr. Haar's response. Over. Anyone? Please. Dale?
Yeah, I'll pounce on that. And by the way, I totally agree. The technical problems are a lot easier to address than the social problems. And they were talking about sci-fi. I'm a big sci-fi fan as well, and there was a series that just wrapped up, I guess it was last year, on Amazon called The Expanse. Did anybody watch The Expanse? Yeah. All right, so if you know The Expanse was not really that much about the technology, but you had people living all over the solar system, and it was all the dynamics, rebel factions and, trying to get along, okay? And that was the real thrust of all the seasons, and they ended up, with sort of a finish spot, but they were still, in a place where they're trying to figure out how to get along, okay? So, yeah, I think you got your finger right on it.
Anyone else want to take it on? Very good. The next question will go to Dr. Edmondson. Given the technology developments and knowledge about the moon and space, could you describe what you envision realistically happening on the lunar surface in the next 30 years? Dr. Edmondson.
So I have mentioned additive manufacturing, additive construction. It's a relatively new technology. I think we are going to see additive construction of landing pads and roads and habitats, or at least some kind of lunar safe haven structure, which is basically just a radiation shield for astronauts and hardware during solar storms. I do see outfitting technologies being developed now through like Drake State and others to be able to outfit those habitats and be able to provide exactly what we need. I see technologies like carbothermal reduction being able to produce oxygen, so we'll be able to sustain life on the moon. I also think we'll be able to use that for fuel, so we're going to be able to enable greater exploration of the solar system because we are going to be able to produce that material from the moon. I also think we're going to start a lunar economy. I know there's a lot of rare earth elements up there, and they're geologically concentrated. So mining corporations are going to be really interested in going up there. And if it's just in the regolith, it's fairly easy to process. You can excavate it fairly easily, fairly, quote unquote. But getting that material is really important for things like electronics. So we need to go out there and get this material. There's also, of course, ice mining potential on the permanently shadowed regions. We've got water ice on the lunar poles, going up there and mining that material. There's carbon up there as well, which is something that you don't usually see on the lunar surface, so we could potentially produce polymers and materials out of that. Again, sustainability. And then I do see us constructing things like radio antennas, and I'd love to see a radio telescope on the far side of the moon, because I think there's so much science that we could get out of that, because it's the radio quiet zone. You're not getting blasted with radio waves from Earth. You actually get to hear what the universe is talking to you about. So hopefully we're going to see this all in our lifetimes in the next 30 years. Thanks.
That will depend entirely how old you are at the time. At least in part.
I'm a hopeful person.
You may see it in your life. All right. Okay. That being said,
It's not that far.
panel, anyone wish to address the comments made by Dr. Edmondson at this point? Anyone? Thank you, Dr. Edmondson. Dr. Strong, what terrestrial applications are being considered for autonomous construction and maintenance of infrastructure? Dr. Strong.
Thank you. So I was 11 when the Apollo mission landed on the moon. Excuse me. And the terrestrial applications that were developed as part of the Apollo mission are in everyday life now. So I think that's what's probably maybe the most exciting part of this Artemis project is we're going to figure stuff out to keep people alive on the moon, and we're going to bring that back to Earth and use those same technologies to keep people alive on Earth. So using autonomous construction and autonomous maintenance equipment in dangerous situations, construction's probably the most dangerous industry in America in terms of fatalities and serious personal injury accidents. So for every one of those dangerous laying a pipe 30 feet underground, right, trying to cast a pier on top of a bridge 800 feet above the water, those are very, very dangerous situations to put people in. So I think a lot of these autonomous construction technologies are going to be brought back to Earth because our industry sees the benefit in that. We have, at Middle Tennessee State University, we have tremendous support from our industry, and they're excited about some of these new technologies that we're talking about as part of the NASA mission. Inspections, it costs a lot of money to send someone out to inspect a bridge in northeast Colorado, where there's not a lot of people there, but there's a lot of bridges. So if you had some sort of a drone or an embedded sensor that is just sending signals constantly to a central location, that becomes a more effective way of doing that. So when I hear talk about the economic benefits of this mission, some people think about bringing rare earth minerals back, and I get that. But I think the real economic benefit is going to be these technologies, communication technologies. It's the same thing that happened with the Apollo mission. Once you figure out how to solve a complex problem, and by solve I mean, right, faster, cheaper, better, safer. Once you have those technologies that are developed for a very narrow application like a lunar habitat, companies on Earth, they figure that out pretty quickly, how to adapt those technologies to make their industries more efficient. So I think that's probably the number one place I could see it benefiting. The other thing that there's already quite a bit of movement on is there's a lot of applications where we need rapid reconstruction. A tornado wipes out a city, or a hurricane, or combat, right, bombing. Let's just take the Ukraine as an example, right? We don't have 60 years to rebuild that country. We're going to have technologies that rapidly rebuild infrastructure, and we also don't have 30 years to build infrastructure on the moon. We got to get up there and get it built in a hurry. So those sort of rapid reconstruction technologies, kind of what Dr. Edmondson was talking about, we got to figure out how to do it fast. We just don't have that much time. Well, that applies to Earth too. There's a lot of places on Earth where we just don't have time to rebuild or rebuild an infrastructure. So I think those are probably the two that I'm most excited about, and I think our industry's most excited about.
Panel, anyone?
I'd like to make a quick comment. Yeah, and it's even more important on the moon because there's no atmosphere. So all the stuff that our atmosphere shields us from, it can destroy stuff on the moon, with no notice at all. So I'm going to go back to the science fiction thing again. When you said autonomous maintenance, autonomous construction, someone in here, I hope, has seen the movie Silent Running. Some of the older folks. Go back and watch it. It's a Disney movie, and it's really good. And it's about basically farms in space, and they had 3 maintenance technicians that were little robots, Huey, Dewey, and Louie. And every time we turned around, one showed up fixing things. And that's, I think, what you're talking about in a larger sense on the lunar surface. But, yeah, silent running. Go watch it.
A little plug there. Anyone else on the panel like to address what Dr. Strong is speaking to? Dr. Strong, you spoke to a technology on the moon, a technology, you almost spoke to it in the context of technology development on the moon and applying that technology back here on Earth, as though the technology was not first produced and or matured, as it were, on Earth and brought to the lunar surface or brought to the moon. Did I get that clearly? I understand that there will be circumstances where you face unanticipated or things that just cannot be replicated here on Earth, but are nonetheless useful here, that were unanticipated, that can be brought back and applied. Right. Can you speak to that, or did I get that right?
Yeah, if I understand your question, the construction industry is not necessarily renowned for its investment in research and development. We kind of borrow technologies that other people have invested in developing, so that's kind of what I'm getting at. A lot of this autonomous construction, and even more so autonomous maintenance stuff that I envision in my imagination, construction companies kind of need other people to prove it works, then they'll adopt it. And I think that's one of the I think maybe some of that was slightly true of jet propulsion technology back in the day. The airlines weren't going to invest in that unless someone else kind of did the physics. So that's kind of what I'm talking about. I think they know how it will be applied, but the working out those technical details, how do we keep it from cracking, right? They're going to have to invest a lot of money in figuring some of that stuff out, and the construction industry doesn't really have a mechanism for that. It's so fragmented. First of all, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of construction companies. So that's where I think a program like the Artemis mission will provide the seed, if you will, kind of plant the seed for some of that, and then they'll take specific technologies and develop terrestrial applications in their sector that part they know how to do, but the basic science, it's just not that type of industry. It lags in that regard. So does that answer your question? Okay.
Anyone else wish to make comments? Our next panelist, I'd like to address the question to Dr. Thomas. This is going to be stimulating, I'll tell you that, because it's a little bit controversial, but nonetheless, I wouldn't expect anything less from you. Dr. Thomas, we've already been to the moon, been there, and done that. Why not focus our time and treasure on the Mars mission? Dr. Thomas.
Well, Joe, that's a great question. So it's interesting that actual question has come up in the debate started back in the Constellation program, which was the preceded, the Artemis program. And a lot of people ask that, and Dr. Michael Griffin, who some of you in here have probably met, he was NASA administrator once upon a time, and he was asked about going to Mars, and he said, well, ideally we should simulate the mission first, to make sure we know how to do it. So, notionally a mission to Mars is a 2.5 to 3 year endeavor, because it takes you about 9 months to get there, and then you've got to stay on the planet for a while until the launch window for the 9-month return journey opens up. So you're looking at a 2.5-ish year mission at best case, maybe even 3. So he said that's beyond their experience window. We've never done anything like that. So what we do is, we need to get a base established on the moon. We put a crew on the space station, let them sit there for 9 months, totally pre-provisioned. They're not getting any support from Earth, okay? And then we send them to the lunar base for a little over a year to simulate the surface of Mars. and then we bring them back to the International Space Station for another 9 months. And if we can do all that without, relying on, resupply and, emergency parts from Earth and those kind of things, then we're ready. And, the other part of that is, and assuming that we've been able to keep the crew mentally healthy for that long amount of time, something nobody has talked about yet is the fact that, the cosmonaut who stayed longest on the International Space Station, just about a year, I forget his name, he was not in good shape mentally when he got back home, okay? So that's part of the equation, too. So my point is, why go to the moon? Well, we really need to do that as a stepping stone. We don't know how to go to Mars. We can solve some of the physics problems. We can build a spaceship and all that. But every single space mission, we still have failures on launch. We still have failures on operation. And as one of the panelists pointed out, I forgot which one, you have a failure on this, it's not like you can get back home in a few hours or even a few days, So the failures are more likely to be catastrophic in terms of loss of life, not just loss of mission. So it's very important to approach this in a crawl, walk, run. When mountain climbers are planning the ascent of a mountain, they don't just go and start. They really put a lot of planning into it, and they even practice on other mountains, okay? That's what we're going to have to do here. And so I always counter that argument about been there, done that on the moon with yes, and we really need to be training, and the moon is an ideal training ground, if you will. We need to be training to go to Mars. And that's part one of it. There are actually two more parts, so I've got just a moment longer I can add, Joe, so I'll ask you, or do you want me to stop there?
Stop there for a moment.
Okay.
Stop there for a moment before we'll ask the other panelists here if they'd like to comment on what you've said thus far, and we'll let you proceed, if that's okay with you, sir.
Yeah, no, that's
Any
fine.
other panelists like to weigh in? Dr. Thomas, proceed, please. Other two parts.
Okay. Well, there are actually two other reasons as well. And one of them is, we've had scientists stationed in Antarctica for as long as I've been around. I remember, learning about that in school, and I thought that was really cool, and that's what I wanted to be after I gave up on being a fireman, but then I went on and became an engineer. So the moon, and Jennifer pointed out, there is scientific merit to studying the moon and using the moon in and of itself. Now, whether the economic factors are there, whether it's an important enough mission to, invest I'm sure billions of dollars to put a radio telescope on the far side of the moon, that's a debate for another day. But the point is, the moon is scientifically interesting. Cosmically speaking, it is right next door. We can get there. Now, that we have shown in Apollo. We can get there and back, So exploring the moon and using it as a scientific outpost, that is also a justification for going back, independent of solar system exploration or going to Mars, okay? And then the third one is, if you are looking at long-term exploration, the moon is just a great location. Okay, it's a good staging point. Okay, you're a large way out of Earth's gravity well. Okay, getting to the moon in terms of delta V gets you about halfway to Mars. Okay, now Saroj, you would probably correct me. It's not exactly halfway, but the point is you've dug your way out of Earth's gravity pull significantly by the time you get to the moon, and it's a lot easier to go elsewhere, whether it be Mars or the asteroid belt, or even the outer planets. It's just, thinking in terms of sailing and air travel, it's like a port, and it's really well positioned. So strategically speaking, it's in a good location. We've also found out that there's a lot of water stored in the poles in the form of water ice. Okay, we learned how to do some in situ processing on that. Water splits into hydrogen and oxygen. We need oxygen to breathe. Hydrogen is an awesome propellant. Okay, it's the best propellant. So it also has resources that are needed in addition to its location, to support the longer-term exploration of the solar system. So there are, to me, three compelling reasons to go back to the moon rather than just take a myopic focus on getting straight to Mars, which I think would be a doomed, expedition if we tried it just straight away. And that makes my 3 points.
It does indeed. I was quite surprised at your response to in some regards, because the nature of those kinds of questions, as you'll soon maybe hear in a moment, but the nature of that kind of question lends itself to the been there, done that. Kind of leads you to one direction, and then you justified that we need to continue being there and doing that in order to reduce risk at all going forward.
Yeah, it was really disappointing to me when Buzz Aldrin, who is Neil Armstrong's crewmate, okay, second set of footprints on the moon belonged to Buzz Aldrin. He was one of the advocates of, not going back, been there, done that. And, I was like, come on, Buzz, you're a smart guy. Think about this. I never did figure that out.
Panel members, would you like to address what Dr. Strong is?
Just one quick add, and that's about the long duration in space and how it has a mental health challenge. It's physical health challenge too. I mean, when these people come back, there was an article that was released not too long ago. It talks about some of the cerebral fluid and how it pools. Yeah, and vision and bone density. So going to the moon and staying there for a long time, if someone has problems, we can get them back. If you got at Mars and they're having problems, they're not going to get back.
Yeah, getting back from the space station is hours, okay? Getting back from the moon is days. Getting back from Mars is months. So, yeah, it's a different ball game.
Anyone else like to address?
I'd like to add one more comment about the scientific value of going back to the moon. And there was a quote by Sam Lawrence, who's a planetary scientist at Johnson Space Center. He said that given how few locations that we went to on the moon, it would be like having aliens visiting Earth and going to the Grand Canyon and then assuming the rest of the planet is just like that. We need to go back to the moon.
Anyone else? Dr. Taylor, how would the next generation, given your background in education and your relationship to our future spacefarers, next generation of explorers, how would they view space exploration? How do they? And what's their vote? Moon or Mars? Or is that perhaps the or? Moon or Mars? Maybe the or didn't need to be there. One of the, please comment.
Thank you, Dr. Fitzgerald. I'm sitting on a panel with esteemed people of science, engineers, scientists, and I'm coming from informal science education. But I have a unique opportunity on a daily basis to interact with young people who it's easy to dismiss them because they're young. They can be dismissed as naive. They can be sometimes defined by the older generation as what they're not. And I have the privilege to hearken back to Jeff's thoughts about the human factors and science fiction. I have the privilege to create weekly a simulated Mars environment and a simulated moon environment where we bring young people together and we introduce them to concepts of additive manufacturing that can sustain them off the Earth in an environment that will kill them if they make a mistake. I have the opportunity to break their brain by throwing in a Mars mission where there's an 8-minute communication gap. And for a generation that is used to instant connectivity with a cell phone, 8 minutes is a lifetime in a one-way conversation. But what I find in working with the next generation of our engineers and our scientists and our physiologists and our psychiatrists and our lawyers and our artists is that they're more excited by the concept of going and doing something than just going. So for them, it isn't so much, do we go to the moon or do we go to Mars? They walk around the U.S. Space and Rocket Center. They walk under the Saturn V. They walk in our atrium and they see SpaceX's model for their experimental human lander. They learn about the Artemis program. They learn of the plans, and they're like, okay, let's go. They assume that humans can conquer the technological challenges. They know it will be tough, but they walk under the rockets, and they say, we've done it before, we'll rise to the event. But what their real questions are is, what do we do when we get there? Because that's going to be critical. We do some exercises with them where we have a segment on space policy. We have a segment about the Artemis Accords. And they're very aware of those 29 countries that have signed up to pursue space in a peaceful manner for the benefit of all. And they are very aware of the countries that have not signed that accord. They're thinking all of the thoughts that have been expressed on this panel. It may not be at the level of sophistication of depth of these great folks that I'm seated with that have years and years of experience, but they're already dialed into working together, working critically together, working sustainably together. I am just, on a daily basis, amazed at how the younger generation, and we're 9 to 18 years of age. I've heard some of the most profound questions come out of the mouths of 10-year-olds that deal with how we will work together when our partners do not wish to work with us. How do we work out of the tough problems? So I would say the next generation is Moon, Mars, yes, but the real questions for them begin with, what do we do once we're there? It's not about going, it's about homesteading, it's about creating new industries, it's about creating off-world endeavors that ultimately come back and support this world, because they do not see going to the moon or Mars as plan B for Earth in any regard. So it's almost like they see sustainability as a given, not for just off Earth, for back on Earth. So I just want to share that with you, because we often think, they're on those phones, they're playing those video games. Do they really understand the complexity? They do understand the complexity, and they do understand they have to come with the science. They've got to work through the hard answers. But it's very refreshing, and I think they're thinking, of course we're going. Just tell us where we're going, and then what's our point once we get there. So.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. Any comments on Dr. Taylor's response?
I might add one, Joe. So last week we had 48 members of the Civil Air Patrol Junior Cadet on campus, right? And I gave them a presentation on the Impact Project. And I expected all kinds of questions about the aeronautics, because they're Civil Air Patrol, and the questions I got were, if we mine all the ice off the poles, will that change the orbit of the moon and affect our tidal patterns here on Earth? And I'm like, well, that's not a concrete question, so I can't answer that. And then somebody said, well, what if we return payloads with rare earth because the payloads go up full, and right now they're planning to come back empty. But if the payloads come back with rare earth minerals and the Russians shoot it out of the sky, what happens then? And I'm like, well, okay, that's not a concrete question either. So their questions were very, very, I was really impressed with the depth at which these young people really thought about some of the big picture issues that are a bigger challenge than the concrete questions. So I was in over my head a little bit. I could have used your help there.
Just roll with it.
Yeah. And I'll just second that as well. Back in the day, I was on the speaker list at NASA to go out and talk to the space camp kids. And I'll just tell you, you had to do your homework for that. So we were always prepped to answer the question, how do you go to the bathroom in space? Okay, that one we had. But, boy, the other questions you got, and the thing was, you couldn't rely on NASA shorthand. You had to really know what you were talking about. And, yeah, the questions were hard, and, I would say it was harder than the design reviews and stuff that we had internal to NASA. But it was fun and engaging, and I always learned from those encounters.
Well, I was trying to, of course, we're trying to answer the question, what do you see as the single most important advancement and that sort of thing. And the theme of this meeting is beginning the new journey for humanity toward the moon. It occurred to me, I was trying to find a common denominator among the panelists here on what that might be. And it occurs to me that that common denominator, at least in my mind's eye, is resiliency. We talked about robustness or redundancy, carrying extra stuff, but what I mean by resiliency is the ability to handle circumstances, things, that are unexpected or even unanticipated. But nonetheless, you're resilient enough to carry and to prevail and to carry forward and conduct the mission. And what's necessary to achieve resiliency? And I think Dr. Thomas and others have addressed it quite well in terms of preparedness. Anticipate the unanticipated, the unexpected, and develop your ability to resolve those things through the resources and training and preparation that you've endured. So if you'd like to, any panelists like to comment on that, and then I will turn it over and we'll go down panelists for a final comment. But any comment on that, Dale?
Yes, I'll just add one thing, and it's been touched on by some of the speakers, but when you were talking about, the resiliency, what makes it harder is, like in the case of Apollo 13, we were talking about, you had the folks on the ground working, and they were in instantaneous communication with the crew. All right. In the case of a trip to Mars, okay, you're getting into those communication delays, and so you're going to have a lot more of that, ground intelligence, if you will, on board and accessible by the crew, and even the crew trained on that. My point is, the mission is going to have to be much more autonomous, and I'm not talking about robots, but I'm talking about in terms of the capability on the spacecraft and the capability of the crew to use it. They're going to be much more on their own.
Absolutely, Dr. Thomas. All right, we're going to go down through our panelists and get some final comments before we conclude today's panel. But I hope the audience has found this quite stimulating. At least certainly I certainly have. And I'm sorry we didn't have time to open it up to your questions, but please seek out the panel member that you would like to engage and do so after we conclude this panel. But let me start off with Mr. Hars.
All right. So my sort of collective takeaway is that my generation, some of us, we're going to be the enablers for the next two generations, basically, to solve all the technical and engineering problems to get to the moon and then Mars. And when we get there, I think we'll find the equilibrium, and as you said, and we're going to do stuff.
Dr. Taylor.
I think it was Dr. Thomas who, in his answer, alluded to the importance of keeping focus and keeping public momentum going for exploration. We darn near lost the space program with the retiring of the Apollo program. And I think we're in a time where the expanding access of nations, of people, of missions, of technologies, I think space is becoming so, and space exploration is becoming so ubiquitous. We're sort of to a point where maybe we're not going to lose the bubble now because we can't turn back because so many people are now invested in it. I think that's a good thing because, our space program came out of kind of like one nation paired against one nation. And we now are talking about economic development. We're talking about technologies that come back and serve the earth. And we're talking about the workforce that's needed to make that happen. I think that puts us in a better position than we've been in since maybe those very heady days of such rapid development that took us off the earth. And I just look forward to continuing to watch how it continues to expand.
Dr. Strong.
Follow up on that just a little bit. It's notable to someone my age how much different the Artemis mission looks than the Apollo mission looked. And you're going to have to go look up Apollo in Wikipedia, many of you who are, maybe not quite as seasoned as I am, but it was nation against nation. There were no Apollo Accords, right? Nations didn't talk to each other. 8 of the 16 Artemis astronauts are women. So I think we focus on all the things that could go wrong internationally and people won't get along and we're going to have 3 men and 3 women in a small compartment for 9 months and what's that going to look like and all that. But the fact that those issues we're facing them, right? We're not just sweeping them under the rug. I think there's real potential for learning a lot of non-scientific stuff from this mission as well. So.
Dr. Thomas.
Yeah, I think that, for me, it circles back to why. And, why explore space? We have plenty of problems here on Earth. Why don't we focus on those? And, it's not an either or. Many times people want to categorize it as such, but it's not. If you look back through history, thriving civilizations explore, they discover, they advance. And all those thriving civilizations also had problems. In some cases, it ultimately led to their downfall. But I will say the why explore, why, maybe build a radio observatory on the far side of the moon. It's all about that scientific, growing our knowledge base, learning more about how the universe works. We live in the universe. The more we know about that, the better we will be. The better we will live and thrive, and our families and children will as well. So that is what I close with about why are we going to the moon, to Mars, exploring. It's because I want to be a part of a thriving civilization.
Dr. Edmondson, please.
So in terms of making science fiction reality, I have to ask myself, what do I envision? And the question kind of goes out to you guys too. What do you envision as the future? Do you see sustainable presence on the moon and Mars? Do you see asteroid mining? What exactly do you guys see? And we have identified some technology gaps, and it's going to be you guys that are helping us to close those technology gaps to enable this sustainable presence. So if you see something that you like in science fiction, like the replicator or some other technology, how can you enable that to happen? Can you attack the technology gaps? How can we all make that happen? And if we work together, we could definitely make our science fiction a reality. Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, the theme of International Moon Day 2023 is beginning the new lunar journey for humanity. And I'd like to think that this panel did just a little bit toward advancing and moving along in that journey and contributing to that journey. So I want to thank all the panelists today, and I'd like to ask for you to give them a warm round of applause, please. Thank you, panelists.
Thank you, panelists, and thank you, Dr. Fitzgerald, for moderating the panel. I hope you all enjoyed the broad outlooks that the panelists provided for you. Sometimes when you do research, you get bogged down into your little rabbit hole of your research agenda, and this panel was able to provide a very broad outlook from several different viewpoints. And we must keep that in mind as we continue down our scientific and research journeys. Thank you so much for your attention. Right now, I would like for us all to take a 15-minute break. We are going about 5 minutes ahead of schedule. So if you will, take a break. There is a lunch served behind you. It's a box lunch. Please grab a box and a drink, and please return back to your seats for us to continue with our agenda. And we will welcome Mr. Richard Fisher, who will then introduce our keynote lecture speaker, John Mankins. We will return at 11:25. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to invite you to continue enjoying your lunch. We will continue with our program with the keynote lecture. I'd like to welcome to the stage Mr. Richard Fisher, who will introduce our keynote speaker.
Okay. Good morning. Dr. Carr, Dr. Sims, Dr. Taylor, Dr. Kingsbury, distinguished panelists, and distinguished space leaders of today and tomorrow. My name is Richard Fisher. I'm with NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center. I'm in the Office of Strategic Analysis and Communication, and it's my honor and privilege to introduce our keynote speaker for the second International Moon Day 2023, John C. Mankins. John is a entrepreneur and internationally recognized leader in technology and systems innovation and management. He currently serves as Vice President of the Moon Village Association. He is also the founder and president of Mankins Space Technologies, the president of Artemis Innovation Management Solutions, a director in Solar Space Technologies, and a professor at Kepler Space Institute. He served as the chief technologist for human exploration and development of space at NASA and the lead for NASA's Lunar Outpost team in 2023, providing key concepts that led to the vision for space exploration in 2024, and has been recognized as a leading expert in the field of space solar power. Mr. Mankins' 25-year career at NASA headquarters and Caltech NASA JPL laboratory ranged from flight projects and space mission operations to systems-level innovation and research and development management. He organized and managed the Exploration Systems Research and Technology Program in 2025 and managed NASA's space solar power programs from 1995 to 2003. He was a PI for a NIAC investigation of a novel solar power satellite concept that he invented, SPS Alpha. From 2016 to 2021, he organized annually a space solar power student competition sponsored by Space Canada. He is well known as a R&D management innovator, building on the 1970s era NASA concepts technology readiness, for which he extended the scale in the 1980s and wrote the detailed definitions of the TRLs and promoted TRL use by the U.S. DoD in the 1990s and participated in development of the TRL ISO standard. He also created the concept integrated technology readiness and risk assessment, including R&D Cube, research and development degree of difficulty, and the technology need value, T&V. Mankins holds an undergraduate from Harvey Mudd College, a graduate degree from UCLA in physics, and has an MBA in public policy analysis from the Drucker School. He is a member of the International Academy of Astronautics, chair of IAA, Permanent Committee on Space Solar Power, and of the IAF Power Committee. He's a member of the National Space Society, AIAA, and Sigma Chi? Okay. Mr. Mankins received numerous honors during the career, including prestigious National Exceptional Technology Achievement Medal. He has published more than 100 technical papers and 2 books, the first International Assessment of Space Solar Power and the Case for Space Solar Power in 2014. Mr. Mankins lives on his ranch in Central California. And so, without further ado, it's my pleasure and honor to introduce my friend and my mentor, Professor John C. Mankins.
long introduction. Richard, thank you very much. I greatly appreciate it. Please go enjoy your lunch. I want to correct only one small typo in what Richard said about me. I do not live on a ranch in Central California. I live in a ranch on the central coast of California. Central California is in the valley, south of Sacramento. Very unattractive, blazing hot most of the time, mostly large fields. The Central Coast is absolutely beautiful. I would invite all of you to come to visit. It's between Santa Barbara and Monterey. It's that stretch of California that's been largely unchanged by time, other than the transition from cattle to grapes, which has occurred since I was a child. So no grapes when I was a child, now it's all grapes. Lots of cattle, now very few cattle. Such is life. Today, my scheduled talk was to be just about infrastructure in the program, and I added the words architecture, which came up during the panel discussion a few moments ago, because of the great importance of how you decide to do a thing, the architecture, the overarching design, and how important that is to everything. If I can make this go. To avoid looking over my shoulders all the time, I've got the slide deck going here, and I got the slide deck going here, and he's promised to keep me synced up. So first I'd like to just start with a couple of minutes about the past. And if you participated in the first annual Moon Village and International Moon Day celebration at Drake State last year, you've seen some of these slides, and I apologize. Okay, excellent. So early visions of going to the moon, when it became a technically viable thing to think about, even in science fiction. So in the days, centuries ago, like Cyrano de Bergerac, it was written that, you know, you were going to use bottles filled with dew to go to the moon, because the dew will rise at dawn, and will tie hundreds of bottles of dew to the outside of our wagon, and up we'll go to the moon. Or we'll tie strings on larks. The larks go to the moon at night, and they'll rise, and anyway. When it became viable, you had writings such as that of Jules Verne, some 160 years ago, talking about how a great gun might be used before rocketry, liquid rocketry, and high thrust rocketry was known about and was understood, but still a remarkably prescient treatment, with a large capsule being fired from a gun located in Florida to go to the moon and later return people safely to Earth. In the early part of the 20th century, in the latter years of the 19th century, discussions of lunar industry focusing on lunar mining, and the idea of an electromagnetic gun to launch materials up from the moon and send them back to the markets on Earth. And then in the 1950s, with the tremendous advances that occurred during World War II, whole new conceptions of how humanity might go to the moon became possible. Arthur C. Clarke, the visionary author and scientist, came up with the idea of geostationary Earth-orbiting satellites. Also wrote a book about the exploration of the moon. in the early 1950s, in which the utilization of lunar resources for purposes of lunar surface construction of habitats and greenhouses and so on played an integral role. Then by the late 1950s, in the heat of the Cold War, the U.S. Air Force started doing studies having to do with things like Project Horizon, in which there would be a set of modules that would be buried on the lunar surface. This was after the discovery of the radiation in the Van Allen belts, which was unknown before the Vanguard program in the U.S. And then by the, I'm just going to have to give that up because it's taken too long for the slides to catch up. And then by the early years of the 1960s, in the heat of the space race and after Sputnik and after Yuri Gagarin had gone to space first, I don't know if any of you have seen the movie Hidden Figures. That, I think, gives a really good sense of the pressures of the day and the need to keep up, and not only keep up, but to outpace what the former Soviet Union was doing at that time. And this was a little booklet put together by two giants at NASA, Robert Jastrow and Homer Newell, on why we should be going to the moon. And if you haven't seen this little booklet, it is a fabulous piece of history. I was given the copy that I scanned for this, and that I have, the physical copy that I have, by a very elderly gentleman, Bill Green, whom I met when I went to work at NASA in the late 1980s. And he entrusted it with me because he knew I was a terrible pack rat and that it would be safe with me. And if you do have an interest in seeing the actual document, please let Dr. Sims know or Richard Fisher, and I will absolutely make the PDF available because it's remarkable. And it laid out a vision for the moon and the reasons to go to the moon that included the global competition, but also addressed issues associated with the science, the history of our solar system, which is recorded in the lunar regolith, and laid out some very primitive ideas about, seemingly primitive, but tremendously changed in just a handful of years from the concepts of 1954 and 1959. By 1963, the outline of Apollo had already emerged, building in large measure on the accomplishments that were made here in Huntsville at the Redstone Arsenal. And then, of course, by the late 60s, the first Apollo missions. The image on the left is Apollo 11. The image on the right is, as I recall, Apollo 17. And in just a few short years, a continuing development and deployment in flight operations of new systems like the rover, like science packages that were placed on the lunar surface, the canonical footprint on the moon, and the first science package that was deployed on the moon. It's the first and the one that's still operating. It's a retrodirective array of little corner cube mirrors that is still being used with laser pulses from the Earth to measure the distance of the moon from the Earth. It's slowly moving away, driven by a transfer of angular momentum through the tidal forces, and is truly, bless you, an exciting scientific accomplishment. Fast forward, skipping a large part of the longer talk because of time, to the present. And what we see are not just two superpowers competing to go to the moon, or three superpowers, but rather a host of missions and programs that are now looking toward space, looking toward the moon, and capable of applying their technologies to accomplish really exciting things. For example, the Cayuga mission, formerly known as Selene, the Japanese mission to the moon, some 17 years ago, Chandrayaan-1, which was the first mission from the Indian Space Research Organization to the moon. Additional missions from NASA because of all, I think partially because of all this activity. The Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, LRO, which is still in operation today, years after it was anticipated that it would stop operating, and a major and important mission, LCROSS, which was a NASA Marshall mission with a partnership with NASA Ames that impacted the moon and provided ground truth of the materials to be found in the permanently shadowed regions at the lunar poles, in particular the south pole of the moon. And this is the result of those missions of the last decade to 15 years, and that is a completely transformed understanding of the moon. 25 years ago, 30 years ago, it was known as a matter of indisputable scientific fact that the moon was dry, dead, and unchanging, and there was no emphasis on going there or doing things other than potential geopolitical concerns. As a result of the missions that I just described and others going back to the 1990s, it was suddenly now understood that the moon, particularly the South Pole, contained in its permanently shadowed regions significant stockpiles of frozen materials. Temperatures are down around 40 or 50 degrees Kelvin. It's 40 or 50 degrees above absolute zero. It's about 220 degrees below 0 Celsius. That in those cold traps, there was significant material. The LCROSS, and that was all measured from space by various missions. The LCROSS mission provided the ground truth by hitting one of these locations, and from it came up about 5% by mass. So about 5 kilograms out of every 100 kilograms of regolith, of lunar material, was found to contain these ices. Now, there's a little bit of scientific debate, and I heard a really great story, which I can't tell you about because I don't have time, about how there was a discussion, oh, well, is it just water ice or is it other ices? And it has now been determined through discussion and debate, well, it has to be other ices. If you've got frozen water, you're going to have frozen CO2. If you've got frozen water and CO2, you're going to have frozen mercury or frozen nitrogen or frozen, that you don't get one without the others because it's a cold trap. It's just a super cold spot. Well, now there is from LCROSS, it was validated, again, LCROSS played a critical role, that these materials are there. They're in lower abundances of water, but they're there in significant amounts, yet to be proven exactly how much and how it is encapsulated. Is it buried in layers? It's probably not frost on the surface, but is it buried in layers? Is it distributed as minerals? But the materials are there. And that has led to a great deal of activity during recent years, including in the Artemis program, related to the Artemis program, the CLIPS landers, including Firefly, and the Volatiles investigation polar rover, Viper. Plus missions from Russia, missions from China, missions from South Korea, missions from India. All of these things are going, and none of this, of course, was even vaguely true 25 years ago. And none of it was true when the vision for space exploration was put together in 2003, 2004. That was the last major push that Richard Fisher alluded to, where I did the technology planning and the lunar planning for that initiative. Now, turning to the future. This is why we can't afford not to go. It's because everybody is going. The things that I just talked about, it's more than 24 countries, Australia, the UK, South Korea, China, Japan, the countries of the European Space Agency, the UK Space Agency, on and on and on, the Luxembourg Space Agency, ISRO, all are going to the moon, and they're going to the moon because everybody's going to the moon. It's like the famous line, you know, I don't go to that place anymore because it's too crowded. Nobody goes there anymore because it's too crowded. Well, that's a baseball joke. But anyway, and I know this is a football town. But the main point being, everybody is going to the moon. Everybody is planning to be on the moon by 8-9 years from now, maybe less. And as a consequence, I think it will be geopolitically unacceptable to the United States to look up at the moon at night and know that everybody else is there and not the United States. I'm just speaking to one of the questions that was discussed in the panel preceding. But it's going to be a very exciting 10 years. There are the missions from Chang'e 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, a whole program of activities from China. I'm going to come back to that more in a moment. A whole bunch of missions from Japan and joint cooperation with Israel and others. Renewed activity from the Russian Federation. The Artemis program, in which there is already been some discussion at today's panel about the Artemis Accords. I'll just mention by way of a passing reference that the Moon Village Association put together the first set of best practices and sort of ground rules for international cooperation and coordination in lunar activities. And there's an ongoing activity that the Moon Village Association organizes for multiple countries to participate in, called the GEXLA, Global Expert Group for Sustainable Lunar Activities, all of which is leading to a roadmap for the next decade or so, which has been out for some years, on lunar surface activities as the U.S. and Artemis partners see them. It involves the Space Launch System, a variety of other launchers, the Lunar Gateway, the Orion Lunar Earth-Moon Human Transportation System, the human landing systems, which have been talked about a lot recently for Artemis, including just now 2 different vendors. And all of that is in the midst of being transformed and changing drastically. And this is just in the last 24 months. It's a really exciting time for you guys who are young people to be involved in space and in looking at the pace of change driven by these dozens of countries, driven by their plans, driven by the technologies. And it's being captured and it's being thought about by NASA, by, in particular, NASA headquarters and by groups of technologists and system architects from across the agency. The Moon to Mars Architecture, a document which is available online, and I recommend it to you, came out only 3 months ago, came out in April, talks about why we should explore, what capabilities are needed to do it, where should systems be, how do we get there and how do we get back, and when will we achieve different objectives, and what does who will the approach include? I can't go through all of that in the time available, but I'm going to highlight just a couple of things. One, the focus on the south pole of the moon, and that's because of the 2 things, but it's primarily resources. The material resources that I spoke about a moment ago, and energy. The lunar south pole offers abundant energy due to sunlight coming in at an angle, doesn't have the same 2-week nighttime that you get at the lunar equator, which for years and years and years drove and limited lunar system studies and plans. And secondly, I want to highlight the lower left-hand box. Who does this approach involve? And the answer being not just NASA, but all of government. So the issue of working with other government agencies, industry, not just contractors, but startups, ventures, entrepreneurs, investors in the private sector, venture capitalists, and so on, international partners more than ever before, and the development of the Artemis Accords and the aggressive push to get those signed by countries about the rules in the road for going to the moon is a critical part of this strategy, and of course academia, but also the general public. This strategy, this architecture document, which came out just a couple of months ago, is quite voluminous. I'm going to highlight only one principal item from what it says, and it is a modification of the earlier strategy from 4 or 5 years ago. The human lunar return, first and foremost, a foundation explorational capability, and that's Artemis Base Camp. Previously, it had, of course, humans to Mars, i.e. we're going to the moon in order to learn how to go to Mars. That remains true. But also the sustained lunar evolution. And this is a recognition that if we go to the moon and then we abandon the moon in 6 or 8 years, several dozen countries are going to continue to work on the moon. And so it's not a reasonable strategy to say that the United States and its allies and friends are going to the moon and then we're just going to step away from it. We're going to go somewhere else. So we're still going to go to Mars, but a key part of NASA's plan is now to develop also sustained capabilities for lunar sustained evolution. I'll talk more about that in just a moment. And that brings us around to infrastructure. And this is a set of objectives for lunar surface infrastructure that came out of a lunar Moon to Mars objectives document published just last fall. All of these things are available online, and I really recommend them to you if you want to see how the strategy for NASA and the U.S. space program and the moon, among all the signatories of the Artemis Accords, is evolving. I'll highlight just a couple. First, because there's 9 of them, and I obviously don't have the time to belabor all of this, but I wanted to just highlight one: power. First, foremost, number one, and I love the fact that this came up during the panel discussion, without energy, nothing. This is like, the old saying, develop an incremental lunar power generation and distribution system that is evolvable, capable of scaling to industrial power levels. And this is just central to the new strategy. There's all sorts of other things, but I just want to highlight also in situ resource utilization, do things with lunar materials, support a robust lunar economy. This is, again, a radical shift in the vision for the future from we're going to Mars to test our capability, to going to the moon to test our capabilities for going to Mars, and then we're off to Mars. An example from this document. So this is an example of use cases. If you're an IT person, you know what use cases are intended to be. Supposed to frame how you're thinking about your customer base and what you're trying to accomplish. 3 time frames, near, mid, and far, where you've got things like construction, manufacturing, transportation, power. A sort of do I have a laser? It's a grain laser too. So for the sustained lunar evolution case, a catch metric, a figure of merit that is related to everything else, is making propellants. So the idea that in the near future you make hundreds of propellants of water. That's not oxygen, that's water from the lunar ice. And in the midterm, you make thousands of kilograms, tons of propellant, and in the far term, you make tens of thousands of tons of propellant. And I'm going to remind you that best case, it's 5 kilograms of water per 100 kilograms of regolith. And so when talking about getting to the point of making tens of thousands of kilograms of propellant, that it's essentially millions of kilograms, thousands of tons of regolith that have to be handled, have to be processed, have to be manipulated, have to be, then water has to be extracted, and all of those things. And that is all requiring power, systems, capabilities that are trivial in scale compared to terrestrial industrial capabilities, but are a staggering aspirational vision for what the moon could be like within the lifetimes of all of you young people. Artemis plans, going back a number of years, you can see the legacy here, and you see the kinds of activities. These specific systems, like the Gateway, like the lander, and so on, they're more directed towards the moon and then on to Mars use case. And then there's the vision of the Chinese National Space Agency and Roscosmos. The international community has been looking at the deployment of the International Lunar Research Station for the last several years, which would involve reusable transportation to and from the moon, a space station in lunar orbit, a moon base on the surface, mobile rovers, a whole series of power stations and hopping robots that can basically use propulsion to go from one spot to another on the lunar surface, and so on and so on and so on. All targeting lunar resource development, lunar construction, the introduction of lunar products into cislunar space. And I think and the Moon Village, of course, is an international organization. We have members from across all of the different countries, U.S., allies, friends, other countries that are frenemies or competitors amongst one another. We take sort of a level playing field for all of this, but what we see is a vision for the moon that within a couple of 3 decades results in significant permanent human activities on the lunar surface. We've captured this in a case study which we call OASIS 2045, which is looking at what would an initial lunar settlement be like about 25 years in the future. We've been looking at this for the past several years. We don't start from the beginning and look the present and look forward. We start with the future and look back. It's a different way of visualizing or envisioning the future. Several different aspects. One, a lunar settlement. What would this be like? What would it be like in its characteristics? Absolutely dependent on lunar construction, absolutely dependent on the use of lunar materials. The spec is for 40 individuals to be living basically indefinitely on the lunar surface with other individuals coming and going. Power stations at the very least on the hilltops going to and from a spaceport, which would be on the far side of the lunar South Polar Ridge. I will mention we chose the lunar South Polar Ridge as the location for OASIS 2045 2 years before NASA settled on its 10 targeted landing sites, candidate landing sites for Artemis. 2 of the candidate landing sites for Artemis missions are within about 100 meters or so of or maybe 1 kilometer of where we've got targeted this OASIS 2045 location. A spaceport protected so that if there were to be an accident or there are ejecta from the landings, that there won't be any impact on the settlement. And mining on the far side of the ridge in the permanently shadowed regions, trying to harvest the resources, the volatiles that are in these permanently shadowed regions. Overall, it comes down to infrastructure and to your architecture. And how do you put the pieces together? But it inevitably includes space transportation systems, surface transportation systems for crew, for cargo, for materials, construction, power, communications, and on and on. Many of these technologies are similar, the systems capabilities are similar to those which have been the dominant deciders of space activities over the past 50 years, launch systems, spacesuits, robots, radio communications, and so on. But others, like remote medical care, like long-term mitigation of lunar partial gravity, like agricultural systems, like medical systems, and on, all of those are new, and they are new opportunities for the students who are now graduating from Drake, from UAH, from other institutions, and want to spend their career in space, in the space sector. It's not going to be a requirement. You want to be involved in the space sector, you've somehow got to become a rocket scientist, because there will be as many opportunities for agronomists and for nutritionists and for psychologists who specialize in small groups in remote settings, and so on and so on and so on. So it's going to be a very different set of opportunities emerging over the coming 5 years or so. And this meeting, the activities here in Huntsville, the celebration of the second celebration of the International Moon Day, the activities of the Moon Village Association, all of this is a part of building towards this future of humanity on the moon and assuring that it is a cooperative and a constructive future that benefits humanity as we would all hope. Thank you very much. Questions, anybody? I don't know how my time stands. Okay, fine. Not even a question from Joe, I'm just shocked. So the biggest distinction between the U.S.'s strategy for the moon and the Chinese ILRS, Russian Federation strategy for the moon, is that in the case of the U.S., we have put humans first. We got some robotic missions, but they're there to do a precursor for humans to go. In the case of the ILRS, it's robots, 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 humans. Robots, 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 human. And so for them, they've got to, and if you of course know that the promises of remote mining of the sea floor and all those things, that's all proven to be really hard in doing remote mining and operations in an extreme environment like the bottom of the ocean. But when humans go, occasionally some corners are cut and people die. On the human side, we are absolutely dedicated to safety, but we don't really want to end up looking at videos of, the 27th launch of helium-3 from the moon by, the Chinese or some other country's mass driver and all that stuff. So we got to somehow balance on their side handling the really advanced technologies that they have to pursue for robotic and automated assembly, construction, operations, maintenance, and on the human side, on the Artemis side of the coin, how to do human activities in combination with robotic activities in a safe and effective and faster way than we've done before. We can't take 25 years to get to a significant lunar presence. I started working on space station in 1983, and it wasn't 25 years, but it was a good 20 years before we had a really decent space station, international space station. We can't take 20 years. It's got to be faster going forward. But we have to do it in a safe and effective way, and I think that'll involve the partnership. So I put it on the human-robot balance and the different ways of doing that and different technologies involved. We have a couple more minutes? Oh, please. Speak loud.
I would like to understand your opinion towards the dust mitigation, especially towards the long-term missions, when every single deployed systems on the surface of the moon will have to deal with the dust mitigation. What are the challenges towards it, and how can we overcome it?
Yeah, so the question involves dust mitigation, lunar dust mitigation, and the both operations and mitigation and so on. So now, personal opinion. I don't know if we can we go back to one of the earlier slides? The Oasis 2045 picture. That one. Okay. So I think out of the population of the world, relatively few people actually work in fields. I live on a ranch. I spend a fair amount of every day out working in the dirt. It's a necessity. I got a really bad infection a few months ago. It took months to get over it. I'm not quite over it, but there are dangers associated with terrestrial regolith because of its biological content, as well as lunar regolith because of its chemical and mechanical properties. I think for the most part, the key thing is for operations that are necessary to take place in a secure environment that's secure from the regolith. And outside, you do only those things that are necessary to do outside. Nobody's building electronic devices on Earth or processing fuels in an open field. You might do some mining, but you bring those things back and then you process them in a controlled environment, because that makes more sense. So that's part of the vision of this illustration, is that would you go forward two, sir? Forward two. Yeah, exactly. So there's this mining operation, and there'll be lunar dust and so on. The mining, going out, getting this regolith and so on, and with a lot of lunar dust and all that, that's being done by robots. The processing of the regolith, extracting the water, making bricks for building habitats, doing things like that is happening mostly inside a sheltered environment where dust is carefully controlled. And where necessary, a pressurized environment, but frequently in an unpressurized environment, but one where dust is managed, the earlier picture. So I think it's a combination of machines that can handle the dust environment, but periodically can be fixed. Nobody strips down their Ford F-150 out in the field and tries to rebuild the carburetor. You bring it to the shop, you bring it inside a protected environment, you fix it there, and then you take it back out. So I think that's the kind of strategy we use here on Earth. That's for the dust, and it's dust on Earth as well. That's the kind of strategy we'll have to use on the moon, where it's partially systems, partially concept of operations. And so I don't think we'll just solve the dust problem somehow. But on the other hand, I think we can solve the dust problem. But I hope that was a good answer. Okay. Please. So the question is, what about the primary source of energy? And of course, there are fundamentally three sources of energy that you can envision utilizing. One is stored energy that's brought with you. Rocket fuels represent stored energy that's brought with you, like LOX hydrogen and so on. The other is solar energy, either made with systems that you brought with you, or rather harvested with systems that you brought with you. And lastly is nuclear. So, and I think it's going to be all of the above. I think that nuclear by its nature tends to be more of a field gun. If you're familiar with the artillery pieces of the Great War, 1917, 1915, so you had some guns that were big, powerful, shot a long way, but they were so big and heavy they had to be loaded on trains and moved by the tracks. And you had other pieces that could be attached to horses, or these days it's tanks, and they get run around the field, and they do all sorts of things flexibly and quickly, and you can have 5 of them or you could have 20 of them. I think solar is more like that. So I think solar is easier and expandable, but it's got some problems because the sun doesn't always shine on the moon. And nuclear is solid, it's reliable, but it's going to take a long time to develop a 100 kilowatt space nuclear reactor system for the moon, and even longer yet to build a megawatt space nuclear reactor system for the moon, and so on. So I think to be nimble, you need solar and you need chemical storage and maybe batteries, lots of batteries. And to be resilient and robust and reliable, you need nuclear. So I think it's all of the above. There's lots of different ways to do it. I think we're going to use them all. This particular one, the up there on the hillside, all three pictures have these solar arrays sticking up into the sunlight. And that's just it's a very convenient way to show that you're looking at the same architecture for a lunar settlement, oasis, from three different perspectives. Because if you'd go back one, yeah, you see up there on the ridge, you got the solar arrays, and you go back one more, and over there on the ridge, you got the solar arrays. So it made a nice way to show you different things and have different concepts and ideas, but all in the same setting. Reactors aren't very attractive. They're just going to sit in a pit in the ground. Him first. Yeah. Big radiators. Big radiators. Yeah, you've got to use basically passive heat rejection by radiative heat transfer. You might envision dropping some things into the ground, but the dilemma is the moon's subsurface isn't actually that cold. It's normalized at a fairly high temperature. Whereas looking at space directly above the south pole of the moon or the north pole of the moon, you're looking at 4 degrees. So you've got all of the sky. So nuclear reactors they're gonna solve their thermal problems by having large to scale radiators that look up where the sun is coming at the south pole and the north pole, and the sun is coming in from the edge, coming in laterally. So that's my opinion. Richard?
One of our panelists brought up, I guess, the human element or the human factors in terms of, I guess, the social aspects of things. What is your advice for the different generations in terms of enabling this future?
So, Oasis 2045 as a concept is not a national lunar base. Off there in the background, you can see somebody else's lunar base nearby. In our conception and the case study that we're doing, Oasis 2045 is basically like a settlement out in the middle of open territory, like maybe Kingstown in the Bahamas, when there's not clear who controls the Mediterranean. So it's small, it's not private per se, but it is private-like, and it's not a national base. But it needs as its customer national space programs, space science programs. Ideally in the economic model for a settlement, you'd see people coming through on their way to the radio observatory on the far side of the moon. They stop over at Oasis, and they gear out for the 3-month trip because they can't fly, because if they fly they damage the optics, so they got to go by surface caravan to get to their Aiken Basin telescope, and they do all that without having it cost $10 billion per trip, because there's a port of call that's available to them. That kind of business scenario. We've done a series of case studies on what would such things actually require to make happen. And just to be consistent, the answer is power, power, power. Oh, I'm being nagged. I'm running out of time. I've run out of time already. I apologize. Thank you very much for your attention and your interest in participating in the Moon Village Association in future. So, thank you.
Thank you again, Mr. Mankins, for delivering the keynote lecture. This concludes our program. I want to thank you all for attending and for being an engaging audience. I wanted to again mention that this event was funded by a NASA Europe Includes grant from NASA and NSF Includes. I wanted to thank the entire Drake State team and UAH team for helping us put this event together. I hope you drive home safely or fly home safely wherever home is. Have a good day.